As you know, each week we kick off the internet seriously by putting it in historical context. So the guys behind the camera have prepared a spooky context so that we're all in the sort of Halloween mode. What we've been doing this week is we've, in the meanwhile, been visiting Singapore at the Global Anti-Scam Summit. Singapore, an amazing place, really hot outside, freezing inside. Very prosperous looking place. In the meanwhile, in the UK, the Labour Party government are preparing their first budget in over 14 years. And it's a testing time. What are they going to do? Defy everybody and actually lower taxes, leave the small businesses and other businesses alone and feed into growth? Or follow in the vein that they've started, sort of offering 22% pay rises in the public sector. Interestingly, Singapore, we find out, has a 10 to 15% tax rate. Welcome to the Internet Seriously. I'm Lucian Taylor in Oxford.
I'm Emily Taylor in Oxford.
And I'm Kieran McCarthy in London.
So, coming up today, Trump goes nuts with Keir Starmer over a LinkedIn post. We give feedback from our Global Anti-Scam Summit in Singapore. And Meta are introducing Know Your Customer in the effort to tackle scams. And finally, the UK government are introducing the Data Use and Access Bill. What? Why? I'm sorry. This is great. This is, we're not going to take all of this too seriously. We've actually got Trick or Treat here as well, just so you know. I think that's designed for us to eat. Or
we can award each other Trick or Treat prizes for various bits of today's show. What about that?
Thank you.
Very spooky.
So, our first topic, Trump. He goes mad with Keir Starmer. The dispute appears to have begun with a LinkedIn post which asked for people to travel. I'm looking at something different. Oh, yes. It asked for people who travel to the US and said nearly 100 were signed up from the UK supporters of the Labour Party. And the post from the Labour Party head of operations, a person called Sophia Patel, added that 10 spots are available and that we will sort your housing. Now, Emily, in the US, you're really not allowed to put funds into people lobbying for you without it being very transparent.
Yes, there is a sort of big anti-corruption drive, and you really often see that when you're interacting with government officials. But I'm really curious about the contrast between the furore over this. Well, I don't know what we will sort your housing. Does that mean you're going to get given a house, or does it mean you'll be accommodated? But there's this, and I think Elon Musk this week has been offering very substantial lotteries and budgets or something, financial reward for people in an effort to boost Trump's vote. So interesting to try and reconcile these two things.
Well, and further to that, Kieran, before we talk about the fidelity of sort of LinkedIn posts and government communication via social media chat, I mean, you've also got like a whole history of Russia interfering with elections quite clearly through the social media influencing and things like that. Trump doesn't seem to have any problem with the really big, bad and nasties, but is picking legal battles with his friends. Would you agree?
I think that's very unlike Trump to be inconsistent. I think you'll find he always sticks to the rule of law.
Yeah. And also kind of, a Halloween villain, Keir Starmer. Really?
Well, there's two interesting things. One is that this is a story only in the UK. In the US, this is a nothing burger, as they say, because there's so much else stuff going on. So in the UK, this is a big issue. The other intriguing thing is the only real reason this is a big issue is because Elon Musk is pushing it, because Elon Musk is in a big fight with Labour. But really, I mean, it's going to sound odd, But political activists, and I know a few, do this, and they go and they especially love the US because the US is such a sort of hype machine and such a fun place to go and get involved politically. So this has been going on for decades.
Well,
and what they mean when they say they give accommodations, this happens all the time, is you ask your supporters to put people up whenever there's an election. And people put up people in their homes, and it's a big tradition.
And I was reading over the weekend, they think this is going to be resolved in that way. But when the lawyers start looking at it and you find out that those 10 slots are in fact 5-star hotels that have been paid for by
or Taylor Swift concert tickets.
Yeah, that's right. When you start to see that, apparently, then there's trouble for the individuals concerned. And I my view is, Trump's always going to be generating fun online, but whether you take that seriously or not, I'm thinking about Labour here. Labour Party won a landslide election victory. They've had a terrible start, Keir Starmer's words. On the one hand, it's business as usual to help parties, but these people are the government. And what are they doing? Betting on one side in the outcome to an election race. What are they doing? Burning bridges with what is looking more likely to be the victor, going by this data in the outcome of this election. We saw like the Boris Johnson government, who, people like Rory Stewart are expelled for being disloyal, and you're going to find a new president that is already in a battle.
Well, you totally right, Lucy, because as I said, my guilty pleasure last week is multiple times a day checking the 538 website, and last week, for the first time since Kamala Harris took over as the Democratic candidate, Trump is now more likely than her to win the election, according to them. And they have very, very granular updates going into the different states. So, and that sort of, it still could be anybody's race. But for the first time in months, it's now more likely than not to be Trump. And this is a very high-risk strategy for the Labour Party to go on, because the US is our biggest ally. And if you do bet on one side or another to win, then you're going to have a hill to climb with somebody who's notoriously petty and bears a grudge and also is much more comfortable with dictators than he is with his allies.
Yes, I can't help but think that these are real rookie errors. You imagine that when a government is in opposition and they're spending 14 years preparing, that they've been planning. They've got all the spreadsheets, they've got the strategy, they know what they're going to do, and they just lay out all of the decision-making. But they do seem to be making it up as they go along.
Yeah, it's been pretty poor performance from day one. I think a big part of this shows that Keir Starmer is not a sort of political animal. If someone was someone is sort of deeply imbued in the political world, they'd have seen this coming. They'd have known that Labour people do this, and they'd have got ahead of it. Especially the biggest issue is that this LinkedIn post was by quite a senior Labour person who was sort of a director of campaigns. That's a big problem. Yeah. And so yes, the Labour government has not been good. Keir Starmer is not a political animal, and he's making a lot of mistakes. And this is coming back to bite him, especially in this election where everything is so heavily scrutinised.
Yeah. Well, it's like you were saying, Kieran, in your campaign video, how hard can it be to run a country? Turns out it's really hard. It's really hard to do.
It's really hard. I mean, when you're in the position where, you're prime minister, for example, there's 1 million things that go wrong every day. It's just and how you sort of see around the corner. I mean, it's a skill. Some people have it and some people don't. And I think we're finding out that Keir Starmer thinks that the job is very different to what the job actually is.
Yeah.
Moving on, Emily, I just noticed you've been described as a witch. How do you feel about that?
I'm quite proud, actually.
I mean, there are
makes me think sort of Stevie Nicks, Rhiannon. I'm going to get the black chiffon out and start my crazy 70s dance.
Yeah, I think
drama.
you're entrapped in a patriarchy.
I am.
You're just following the norms that have been set for you.
Yeah.
So I think we are going to do a guilty pleasure online. Mr. McCarthy, what is your guilty pleasure online?
It's not online, it's offline, this one, and it is stealing my children's Halloween chocolates.
Have you ever been busted?
No, I usually say I'm just checking on them. I mean, they're at the age now where I think they're going to twig. But the truth is, they get so many of these things. They walk around.
They don't need them.
Massive buckets of chocolates. You can't let them eat them all. We learned that fast. You can't let them, free reign on the day.
What happens if they eat them all?
Madness. It's absolute madness, as any parent will tell you. Massive influx of sugar, then crashing, and then it's a disaster. So you have to ration them.
So it's actually a health intervention. It's a well-being and a health intervention, and you're sacrificing yourself. Yeah. Really, that's
nothing to do with you. This is
it's about all about the kids.
Thinking with the kids. Okay.
Those chocolates will go off if I don't eat them because I have to ration them out. So that's why I will put them.
I'm just trying to bridge. Help me, guys. I'm just trying to get out of this nonsense. It is a little bit serious. The internet, seriously.
Okay.
Global Anti-Scam Summit.
I'm going to award Kieran some trolley. Good Verschmischen minis there. Okay, so they're here for you.
Love it.
As a prize.
In the Global Anti-Scam Summit in Singapore, we heard from Google announcing their work with the new Global Signal Exchange, GSE, which we're very excited about because our company is running the software behind that. So we're obviously super proud about that, and you're going to hear that all the time in our insecurity and delight at being backed by a winner. But also another big one is Meta, who have announced their commitment also to support the project. They're working on it. They're not there yet, in addition to other security developments. And this is a interesting thing that you wanted to talk about, Emily, that Meta are starting, and we're seeing this more and more across many of the providers out there. Meta are starting to introduce Know Your Customer. Do you want to do an explainer? What is Know Your Customer?
Yeah, so Know Your Customer describes a series of different interventions and processes that an organisation can do to ensure that the person that they think they're dealing with really is who they're dealing with. Now, the most obvious version of that is to check people's identity when they sign up for a service at first, but it also includes other steps throughout the life cycle of a service online. So it could be looking out for a behaviour that doesn't seem quite right. Sometimes you will find, like, when you sign into a service from a different location, you get a little security intervention. You have to verify your account. All of those things go to Know Your Customer. What's it about? Well, it's about trying to reduce impersonation, which is the root of scams and fraud online.
So presumably, Kieran, I don't know if you've got a view on this. My dead dog has a Facebook account. And if they, I suppose, see some sort of intervention in Jessie's identity or something wrong with that account, they can go to Jessie. They can ask her for an identity verification. They were looking at actually AI because they were very excited about AI and facial recognition and scanning. I
can. Oh, Kieran, do you want to?
Well, I'm not. It depends what Jessie's up to. What is Jessie doing? Is Jessie spreading misinformation?
No, it's actually quite discreet.
No, it's more like, given that she's dead, that, and this is spooky, so we're talking about this, but it's more likely that somebody has taken over her account in some way and got into the account and then is sending sort of strange messages from this dog from the past to potential victims.
I'm going to dig you out of this hole, Lucy.
No, they're Meta. I'm just seeing how's this going to apply.
Well, I was really interested in the way that Meta described what it's doing, because we at the DNS Research Federation have been looking at Know Your Customer in some depth because it's coming in to the law to require domain name registries and registrars and others in that domain supply chain to do Know Your Customer. There's a whole load of debate that's been going on for years about whether it works, who the most appropriate people to do it are and what is supposed to do it. So now Meta is introducing Know Your Customer. And what's very interesting to me, having listened to that debate in the domain industry, is how differentiated and risk-based Meta's approach is. So they're not doing it for everyone. They're leaving their user customers alone. They're applying it to the paying customers, advertisers, and then only on a risk-based level. So they're looking for warnings that something might be dodgy.
And Kieran, I was really interested in that hard differentiation between the business customer and the consumer customer. And because they said as well, I mean, Nathaniel Gleischer from their security department, really high up there, was basically saying you've got to be careful with Know Your Customer, because what happens is if they get a fully verified customer and that customer themselves is a scammer, that they've somehow scammed the Know Your Customer system, and they can do that with fake identities, fake passports. They can actually turn that verification by Facebook on its head and actually use that for more scamming. So it's a real sensitive area. But they've been having a problem with advertisers. Fake advertisers from scammers taking people to fake websites and drawing them into a nightmare. We were hearing from scammers who have lost their whole lives, savings, relationship scams.
There was an incredibly powerful testimony from a woman called Tracy Hall, who had her entire life savings of $300,000 scammed away from her by a guy who had spent 18 months in a relationship with her, a real-world relationship. And it was just an astonishing story, an incredibly moving and terrifying account. But, going back to Meta's approach, I was really struck by this idea of differentiated friction. So ask people for things that is easy to do if it's really you, and difficult to do if it's not really you.
And, it's the smart move.
It seems
a smart
really
approach.
Thoughtful.
It means that you get bang for buck, and I think they've been very clever with this. They've found where they can have the biggest impact, not with the smallest resources, but sort of in the most effective way possible. And I think that's right. You choose the people that are organized, that are maybe potentially putting money in order to get money out. And you use little things which are easy if you're genuine and difficult if you're not genuine. It's a smart move. I'm intrigued to see how successful this is.
I'm also wondering if other businesses will be able to use Facebook ID as a two-factor verification for themselves. The thing I really loved was their AI facial recognition. They're not comparing that, woo, I'm a zombie. They're not comparing that to government identity, your face. They're actually comparing your face that you may give to a camera identity session to your online profile pictures that they already have. So the historic archive of you, which is nice and low friction. You're not having to upload a load of government identity. And the minute government is involved in these sort of security verifications, there's all sorts of countries that become very, very unhappy about that.
Yes, indeed. And the other thing that struck me is, of course, a company with the resources that Meta has been able to do lots of imaginative and actually probably quite fun to do stuff, because you're going to be moving and doing things to prove that you're a real person, not an AI, that the resources within the domain industry are so much lower. The domain industry does not have the choice of hey, we've developed this incredible AI detection thing, real person thing. But also it struck me that the relationship between a platform and their customers versus the relationship between a domain registrar and their customers are so different. You think about the way people are reacting to Twitter, X at the moment. There's something about a platform which involves you it's a high involvement relationship, we would say. So you choose your platform, you care about it. You probably don't even know who your domain registrar is. And so the whole thing of know your customer in the domain sector is a very different beast to what we have in a sort of gateway into a community that you will cherish and value.
And that comes to intermediaries, Kieran. You're very well associated as an executive director with the manager of the .uk domain name, Nominet, and they made an announcement earlier last year that they were employing Know Your Customer for new accounts, new registrars, and they were employing an intermediary who is actually an American identity manager. You know, you have things like Yoti and stuff like that, where they basically mediate, ingest government ID and things like that, and match that with an online camera session. Those sort of services, I think, are really quite smart. They're great, but some of the registrars are making less money per year per domain name on actual domain name trading or domain name operation costs versus the cost of Know Your Customer. So this is quite disruptive, wouldn't you say? Without going into the background of Nominet, I mean, it's a technology that's been needed for some time, but it is going to have costs.
Yeah, this is kind of quite a few complicated interactions going on right now. So governments and the UK government are making it clear that this needs to be dealt with, and so business doesn't want to be regulated, and so it's sort of increasing these efforts. And if government is really smart, it'll figure out a way to put in legislation a way that encourages people to do it, but also to share that kind of knowledge. So if we can figure out a way that Facebook can share this kind of knowledge, and then if Nominate system is, I should say I'm a non-exec director.
Sorry.
Nominate system is, it's another way of checking. They have the resources and they thought this was important. So it's another way of checking that people are legit. And if we can figure out ways that Nominate shares that information with the industry, and then if the industry will then be encouraged, I hope, to do a little bit more than it's doing right now, which is important. Some of that will be in legislation in Europe. If we can all then start working together, I think we'll end up in a situation where it's not that complicated or that expensive, but people pick up different elements of it and different components of it and work together. That's the dream. That's where we need to end up, and that's what'll work. Rather than currently is quite expensive, and I sort of applaud Meta for jumping out ahead of it and putting the money and the cost in. And as our report sort of pointed out, there was other companies that do it. We looked at, I think, Bumble, which does online dating. We looked at the crypto industry, which has to do it by regulation, and we looked at the financial industry, which is highly regulated, and sort of learned lessons from that as well.
Yes, and some of those that you think are really blue chip and have really got it are actually, the finance industry and the banks. There are banks that are really awful at it and still service scammy accounts that we were finding out this weekend. Anyway, we've had enough of that. This is all too serious, but we are the internet seriously, and we do geek into serious parts of the internet industry, and that is as an engineer, for me, that is a fascinating topic that we'll keep tracking developments in those areas, because things are changing, because they have to, because the scams are absolutely massive out there, and this is badly needed. But on to some topical fun, a spooky special we have instead of our Room 101 this week. I don't know anything about this, but the voice of God is going to help us understand.
Good morning, everyone.
Oh, that's very scary.
I can see you trembling. We're going to play a little game.
Oh.
So, the premise is, I'm going to ask you some questions. There's going to be two options, and you have to decide amongst yourselves which one is more scary and which one is less scary.
Good.
And we ask as a team. We sort of solve this as a team.
Yeah, well,
yeah,
you can let your personal opinions get involved if you'd like.
Right, this is great. This
Okay,
is
thank
really
you, God.
super. Thank you, voice of God.
No worries. Right, so first question. What is more scary? Finding an old family photo but everyone in the picture has no face? Or your passwords suddenly failing on all your accounts?
They're both very scary.
Do we have to answer now, or can we're going to hear all three?
Well,
No, let's
No,
do
don't
this.
answer.
Don't answer that. This is a good quiz. Don't want to answer
Don't
that
answer any of the questions. I'm just going to read them
Kieran,
out.
what do you
We'll answer
think?
them at the end.
Well, I mean,
All right, let's do this.
Passwords
This all
for
gone
me.
out of
because,
control.
Obviously, the passwords for me, because I look at a lot of family photos and they've got no faces on anyway because they've faded out. I'm just used to that. They're just crap from 40 years ago.
yeah, those photos used to be rubbish, didn't they? They would fade over time. You get those, the sticky.
Yeah.
You pull it back and you open it. Go, oh, let's look at these. And you're like, what? Who is that? It's all
A
faded.
year later, it's gone brown. It was those instant ones. I can't remember what
My
they're called.
password stopped working. I would think, oh my God.
God, help me.
Okay,
Somebody-
I'm going to go for the no faces thing because it reminds me of a Doctor Who episode that even though I was an adult, I couldn't sleep afterwards, where everyone's faces kind of went, and that was really bloody terrifying. So
Now, I do
I'm going for the
spend-
faces bit. But yeah, old photos do fade. They're a bit like old style faxes. Do you remember those? Where you go back and look at it a couple of years later, there's literally nothing on the page.
There's something personal I'm going to say about Emily. She is actually quite a chicken. She stands behind sofas hiding her eyes when there's a spooky film
I
on.
can't stand anything like. Can you watch horror films, Kieran? I can't. I just can't do it. I'm too terrified.
Yeah, I can, but I find the ones that get me are the more sort of psychological ones where I'm thinking about them and then I think, I wish I hadn't watched that. That's
Number 2, please, voice of God.
Question number 2. What is more scary, hearing whispers in the dark when no one is there, or when your phone dies just as you're about to pay with your mobile wallet at the grocery store?
This one's easy because I never pay with my phone and mobile wallet. There we go.
Phone dies. Okay.
Whispers, definitely. Do they have to be voices in your head, voice of God, or can they be real whispers that aren't there?
Can be both.
Okay, well, that's just terrifying.
I'm gonna go with the second one. I'll tell you why, because it could be anything. Like someone's watched the whispers. Could be like, oh, someone's left an iPad on somewhere. I hear this all the time. I've got used to it, but I do use my phone for everything to the point where I've stopped taking my wallet with me. So if I'd gone and packaged up all my shopping, and then didn't realize that my phone had died, I would then be, I'd have to come all the way home again. I'd have to deal with the, the societal shame of having packed up all my stuff. And then, so I wouldn't say it's scary. I would say it's more frustrating.
And shaming, because you might have to
Shame,
put get your supermarket trolley, your full supermarket trolley, and go around the shop and put everything back on the shelf where it belonged.
I've got another one which is.
I wouldn't want you as a security guard. Right, put that back.
Just do
No
that, Mr.
beans.
McCarthy. Very nice. I believe you. Just put all the stuff back now.
I must admit, I am definitely under the 14 recommended units a week, I promise, but I do hear whispers in the dark quite often. But my phone did die at an American border control, and that was really scary because
scary.
my entry documents were virtual. They were in my email. I now print them out and carry them with me every time. Question number 3, voice of God.
Yes, let's wrap this up. Final question. Hearing your door creak open when you're alone in the house, or when your printer jams while you're trying to print something important at the last minute.
Okay, I'm going to start with this first. Okay, you started this with anything, some words, and then you talked about printers, which gives me. I mean, Katie who produces the internet seriously, and I like to print something just to have something to write on just before we do this with a few headlines. And the bloody printer, again, there isn't a printer out there. Is there anybody out there who can recommend a printer that actually works? This is not about spooky or not spooky. This is just terrible shit for us all. Are there any printers that work?
There's no such thing as a printer that works. In fact,
We put people on the moon.
Something we heard at the Global Anti-Scam Summit this week is because every presentation, Kieran, had to have, and we're using AI to blah, 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 blah.
Of course.
Right, of course. And there was one of the participants who came from a public safety law enforcement background, not the sector you think of when you're thinking of, really tech tooled up. They have a rule in their office that if anybody talks about AI, they have to attach the printer by a USB into a server and make it print something. And until they do that, they're not allowed to talk about AI. And I think that's a great rule.
But using the printer as punishment, I love that.
So I don't know if there's any winners or losers. I think we found really that compared to psychodramas, whispering in the dark and nightmares, I think the results are pretty astounding, that tech problems are much more scary than the supernatural.
And it's a Gen Z competition. We all won.
Everyone's a
We're
winner.
all a winner.
Everyone's a winner,
We're all
that's for sure.
extraordinary.
Thank you very much. Great, we all feel that we've won. Fantastic.
We're more scared of technology than we are of the supernatural. That's worrying, isn't it?
So finally, the UK government, Kieran, are introducing the Data Use and Access Bill. How did you hear about that?
Well, it's the old thing called Parliament. It's still, at the moment, at least, you have to actually use Parliament and put bills through. So that's a good innovation. It's a kind of a reformed version of a conservative bill, pre-election they tried to put through. But it does pull out one really controversial aspect, which was facial recognition, allowing the police to do significantly more of what they want to do with facial recognition. But what it claims to do, and I think it probably will, it's a good idea, is to free up to sort of GDPR has put so many constraints on the use of data, or even perceived constraints on the use of data, that it actually gums up the work. So to be fair to the police, they do every time they access data, they have to explain why they're accessing it, and that just adds to crazy levels of paperwork. The NHS has real trouble accessing and sharing data, which is in nobody's interest at all, and I'm sure and the idea really is to give consumers the ability to authorize the use of their data so they can be used in this way, which will be good. And the same digital identities, we were talking about digital identities. If you change the law a little, then you allow people to say, yes, I authorize this third party to access my data, and they don't have to jump through 55 hoops to do so. So this is all good. But if it goes a little bit too far and the EU says, no, I'm sorry, this isn't compliant with GDPR, our version of GDPR, and I understand they're revising it, then they're going to say, no, you can't share data, and that creates an absolute world of pain. So it's interesting, it's kind of correct, but they have to be careful.
And I have a point, which is, I believe passionately about the sort of corruption. If there's a loophole for corruption, if there's a way that a rogue policeman could in some way create a false facial recognition. The courts, just as we saw with the Horizon scandal, the courts automatically believe any technical evidence without any skepticism. And if we start to get data that sort of can be twisted in some way and meddled with and fiddled with by, we hear about the odd bad policeman. I have a lot of time for the police, but it's just like, I think it was Jefferson who said, I'd rather put nobody in prison than one innocent man, or something. I can't remember where that comes from, but the phrase sticks in my mind. You've got to make sure that if you're putting people in prison for things through stuff like technical data recognition or Horizon scandal audit logs that were bad, you've got to be really careful.
Yeah, and that's exactly why the police, law enforcement and public safety have to go through those strong safeguards. But Kieran's right, the strong safeguards take time. And particularly when you're going across borders, the mutual legal assistance treaty stuff can take 18 months. Whereas the average lifetime of a scam, a phishing attack, is hours. So you've got a huge differential. I'm intrigued by this, Kieran, because one of the things that has struck me since Brexit is the packaging of essentially transposition of European law into the United Kingdom. So it just so happened that when the Network Information Security second directive came into law in the European Union, the UK did something a little bit similar. And actually there has been a lot of anxiety within the EU about the impact of the unintended consequences of GDPR is that now people just believe it's not lawful to share data, which is complete rubbish. But there are legislative proposals, and it might even be law now, that to try and encourage the sharing of non-personal data within the European Union. And it just so happens, coincidentally, that the United Kingdom is putting forward legislation with the same objectives. All of this keeps us in line and makes us less likely to lose adequacy, in other words, the legal basis to share data between the EU and UK, which would be a disaster for us.
I agree, and that interoperability matters. And this seems to be febrile, isn't it, Kieran? This sort of the tech industry and the regulators are trying to fix things fast.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little complicated. I mean, there's a whole bunch of issues in here. There's the whole Brexit issue, which I don't think we should delve into. But that's true. The politicians they can't come out and say that it's causing the reality, which is that we're still sort of defined by Europe because Europe's such a huge market. So I'd love to dig into what the EU is suggesting and see how it tallies up with the UK. But no, the government is not going to say we're doing what Europe's going to let us do. They're going to point it as a big, amazing UK issue. But it's still an improvement.
Yes.
I like that.
Yeah.
At some point, I'd really like to dig into facial recognition. I've been tracking it. In fact, I went to go and spent a few hours tracking facial recognition in my part of London and their sort of 2 roving facial recognition units. I've been following that quite closely. And it's a really interesting debate about where that balance lies.
Oh, it'd be nice to hear about that. Maybe a topic for next time. So we've nearly got to the end. We've got time to just revisit last week, our comment of the week.
Yes, our comment of the week this week is from last week's episode where we discussed Elon blocking the block button. And this comment is from Doogie Talons, which says, "Twitter is toast. Uninstalled it ages ago. Free speech doesn't mean you're forced to listen."
I don't quite understand the free speech doesn't mean you're forced to listen. So if you keep
it's the same concept of freedom of speech, but not freedom from consequences of your speech. It's like you can just spout out whatever you like, but nobody has to be compelled to listen. So that's thank you very much, Doogie or Dougie. It's great to have that engagement and really thoughtful comment pattern, massive thread underneath that short video. So,
but I'm interested, Doogie. I think a lot of people have taken that view. Wouldn't you agree with Doogie Talons' view, Kieran? And thank you, Doogie. That Twitter is toast. Forget it. We've kind of been saying that as an organisation. Is Twitter relevant anymore? Do we need Twitter anymore?
So it's been really interesting in that I got to the point where I nearly came off Twitter because it was clearly they were monkeying around with the algorithm and I was getting garbage. And then the people did start leaving. There has been pressure. And the last week or so, the quality of what I see has massively increased. So the problem we have here is there's a hell of a lot of really wonderful stuff on Twitter, but Twitter decides what you see. And that's the problem. And how we resolve that, I don't know. But if Twitter had started losing people because it was pumping out garbage and it was a cesspit, and at least with my feed the last few days, it's now really thoughtful, intelligent analysis from people. So it's gone back to being really useful. The fact that it's changed so quick that they adjusted the algorithm, now something that I decided to give up on, I now actually go out of my way to open, and that happens in a matter of days, is actually a little bit worrying, and I don't think we're quite ready to understand the sort of implications of that. But yes, I mean, it was rubbish. People did leave, and it got better. That's where my summary is with Twitter right now.
Thank you very much. We've got to the end, sadly, of a fascinating episode of The Internet Seriously. We've been discussing Keir Starmer picking a fight with, going to war with the United States using a provocative LinkedIn post. We feedback from the Global Anti-Scam Summit in Singapore, which was a very interesting event where Meta was basically introducing a new Know Your Customer technology in the pipeline that enables us more, helps everybody tackle online scams. And we just finished there with the UK government introducing the Data Use and Access Bill. What and why? Thank you very much. Hope you haven't been terrified out of your shoes. That was the end of the Internet Seriously. Please rate and review whenever you listen to the podcast as well, the podcast version. Please rate and review. Thank you very much.